Everybody, how you doing? I can't wait for you to respond to that. So as for you, anything recent? Well, it's about what 10 p.m. right now, and your mom still isn't home. So she obviously has a deadline. You don't know this yet, but your mom's a landscape architect, or as she would humbly put it, a landscape designer. But in my perspective, she's an architect. There's no design exclusive aspect of her life, from my point of view. I think she won't accept herself as a landscape architect because she hasn't passed some type of test. I don't know, but she's an architect to me, and she's currently she's part of a project. Her firm that she is a part of. They are working on the. In other words, she is working on the Olympic Village that is due to be built for the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo, right? And they just started moving the dirt, as she would put it. And so I'm assuming the reason she's late right now is because there was some kind of deadline for another revision of the Olympic Village. It's a really big project, obviously. You don't know this yet, but Olympics are a big deal. You'll eventually understand and realize how big of a deal they are. And so if you have an opportunity to be a part of the Olympics in any shape or form, it's a huge thing. Like when they were in my town of Salt Lake City back in 2002, everyone that lived in that area would go and volunteer, and they get like a special jacket that had like the signature rings, right? And people to this day, I mean, I haven't been back to where I'm from for years now, but I guarantee if I were to go back, especially during the winter time, because that's when they had them. There's Olympics during the winter and during the summer. You would still see individuals with your mom just came home.
What? Just get home?
Yeah. What's up, bud? You're gonna be seeing a lot of this when you grow up. Unless I don't know what technology is gonna exist when you grow up, but you're gonna be seeing a lot of people looking down their phones while they're talking to you. A lot of stuff has happened. A lot of progress being made on my side of things. You're still doing your thing inside mom's belly. Your world hasn't changed that much. You're moving a lot. You're starting to recognize a lot of different sounds. Reacting to sounds differently. You know, like you'll move differently when you hear my voice, and you'll move differently when you hear a new voice, and then you'll move really differently when you hear like a brand, like a voice that I think there's adult. I think you recognize the difference between an adult voice and you don't know this, but the best way to put it is an adult voice, or the tone of an adult voice, and a child's voice, because you definitely react differently to certain types of voices. I may have already said this. So what's happening my side of things is I've come across a big realization. I'll be right back. Oh, it's right here. It's right next to me. So a while back, I read this book called A Mind's Past by his author named Michael Gazzaniga, right? And in this book, he introduces this idea, not an idea, he introduces this thing he discovered while doing research on or conducting surgery. I can't remember what he did exactly on people with split brain patients. So individuals with who had epilepsy, and the best way to treat them was to disconnect the two sides of their brain. So for some reason, people with epilepsy, the reason why they had epileptic occurrences is because the brain was trying to communicate to each other. It was just the communication was off, and so there was like one side was telling the other side something, or the other side was telling the other side something, and it just caused them to just not be able to function at all. Like if say one side saying, "Hey, move your hand," but the other side is saying, "Hey, don't." So you'd go like this. You would move and then not move, and then move and then not move, and then since brain communication is happening, at nanoseconds of speed, right? You start shaking, right? So you cut the cord, or you cut the communication pathway between the two, and they stopped doing that. But then also, without that communication, other things are affected. And so he discovered that communication was affected in an interesting way. He discovered that the brain was not able to experience something visual, or experience something, basically, and then draw from one's experiences, draw from memory to properly attach meaning to this thing in a natural way. And so he said, because this doesn't exist in people with this split brain disorder, it must exist with people without it. So he calls it an interpreter. He calls it something that uses past experiences that exist in the working or long-term memory, using that to interpret the present, right? That turns out to be a crucial device for helping one learn languages anew. So learning second languages and whatnot. The way I discovered it is, I discovered that in a unnatural language learning environment, for example, a classroom, it is taken as it's assumed that the state in which one should interact with language is in its complete shape. So one should interact with language. If it's a sound, then they should know. They should be able to see a representation of the sound in its perfect shape, and then they just have to internalize it. They just have to consume it somehow, right? And if it's the meaning of a word, then they just have to interact with that meaning in its perfect shape. And this usually comes from, say, a dictionary or a direct translation from one's native language. But the problem with this is the brain did not develop to interact with language in that way. The brain developed this interpreter to interact with language in an incomplete state. So language in a natural environment, you are never introduced to language in a natural environment in a complete package. It's always half truth or half true, or it's always incomplete. So for example, sound. If it sounds, we are not introduced to sounds in a natural environment in their complete state. We capture basically we capture the most important part of it, so that we know that this sound is different from another sound amongst a series of sounds, and that typically is we capture the beginning and the end of a particular sound that represents a particular word. So we only capture the beginning and end. The middle, we completely ignored it in the beginning, right? And then we only attach and meaning also. We never learn the entire meaning of a word, or of or a sound that represents a particular word. We never learn the entire meaning from the get-go. We recreate, in a sense, meaning as we go. So what I discovered is the brain needs a space in a sound or in a meaning into which it using the interpreter, it draws experiences, relevant information from the past, and it fills the space up with what it thinks it means, what it thinks it sounds like. If you don't give the brain this space, the interpreter doesn't have anywhere to put this stuff. And if the interpreter is not able to do its function, it's going to get overwhelmed. The reason it's going to get overwhelmed is because the interpreter is still working, because it's designed to do one thing and that's all it does. But if there's no room to do it, then it's like it's churning out energy without having an output. And so if you continually give something energy without it being able to output it, it's going to overheat, explode, and get overwhelmed. So if you give someone, if you want someone to learn a word, learn a language, and you give them you give them this language in its complete state, the interpreter can't use that. The brain can't use that thing to learn because it doesn't know how to. It wasn't designed to use this language in this shape, and it gets overwhelmed. So it's inconvenient because this is the only shape in which one can interact with language in a unnatural, say, classroom environment. Everything comes in a complete, perfect form. Nothing comes incomplete. So basically, outside of memorizing, you can't learn language in a natural in a classroom environment. And even with memorizing, you're not learning language, you're memorizing. There's one thing which is just copying something, and another thing is making something or recreating something. They're two different things. Memorizing is copying something. The only thing we memorize in a natural environment are I haven't thought about this too much, but I think the only thing we memorize in a natural environment are stuff over time. So it's not even memorizing at that point, it's just remembering. You could almost say that memorizing is a completely unnatural action. For example, in language learning, there's only two functions right now that I know of. In a natural environment, there's only two functions going on. One function is recognizing similarities across time. It's called a statistical learning. The reason why you have that function for language learning is because sounds, relevant information is always repeated across time, and we need to understand what this relevant stuff means. We need to attach meaning to it. So we recognize similar things across time. These could be similar things in isolation or patterns. And the other thing is this thing I just explained, interpretation. Feeling these, because initially they just start out empty. All we know is that they're similar, but they start out empty. And then we fill this stuff with meaning. Those are the only two things. And neither of those actions require memorization. Which is very interesting. Because memorization is this unnatural action we do in which we try to put something into our long-term memory in a way in which we naturally don't do it. Yeah. So most of the technology out there, like the Cerigo.com stuff, the more effective it is, the more it starts to resemble the natural process. So, for example, they'll say you should acquire these words and then come back to them after 5 days. All they're doing is recreating the natural environment in which we would naturally, relevantly interact with these things. They're just recreating that environment. So that's a big thing. The recognizing that the two functions are simply statistical learning and filling in the gaps with the interpreter. And the thing is, we automatically do the interpreter thing. All you need to do is show someone something like this. Show something like this, right? Show them a beginning letter and a final letter, and then have the middle just completely blank or, unintelligible symbols, and they will decide what this means, and they'll find joy in figuring out what it means. It turns into a puzzle, and the brain is designed to just do that. The brain's designed just to fill in the gaps. So people will say something like, "Oh, this is people. Oh no, this is a purple. Oh no, this is prison." They'll say anything. Prize. They'll say something. Phone, right? They won't say phone. That's the funny thing. The only way someone would say phone there is if they learned words first, the spelling of words first. which is also an unnatural thing. In order to learn a sound in an unnatural environment, you have to learn this. You're given the spelling first, which is completely unnatural, completely opposite. In a natural environment, spelling comes later, once the sound has already been acquired and mastered. Then you learn how to spell it. So those two things, although they don't seem big to a lot of people, they're huge because they completely they destroy the foundation of language learning in a classroom. Completely destroy it. And so my job has been how to use these, how to recognize and accommodate these natural things we have in a classroom. And it's been pretty fun. I've been doing a pretty good job of doing it. I have perfected my first lesson, and I'm pretty proud of it. I get a lot of good reactions from my students. Surprisingly, I get better reactions from my university students who are 18, 19, right, than I do from my students who are older, like 60. It's like the more time you have spent in a classroom, the more ingrained these unnatural characteristics become, to the point where, like Lakoff says, they're like experiential gestalts. It's like the component parts become so ingrained in our head that they're what's the opposite of component? So the component parts appear so often together that their combined shape becomes the only reality we know. And so people, I'll tell my students, I'll say, hey, there's two worlds. There's a world where you learn English in the classroom, and then there's another world where you learn English similar to how you learned your native language. And then we'll really break it down, and they'll really figure out what the two worlds look like, the differences, right? And it's easy for them because they'll be like, oh, so I'll say the English in the classroom is B and the native is A. In world A, the way I learned my native language, Japanese or whatever, is just everywhere. I would learn it from the TV, from friends, from family, from the guy in the street, from taxi, just everywhere, right? And then in B, I learned it from a teacher, right? And then I'd say, okay, so which one's natural? And they'll be like, well, obviously they all say initially A. Yes, A is natural because even a baby can do it. So I'm like, okay, so if A is natural, then B is unnatural. In other words, learning it in a classroom is unnatural, and they will all say no. They'll say no. They're like, no, it's not unnatural. So then I'm like, well, how can we have two completely different worlds be the exact same? Because they're clearly not the same. So then I'll say, okay, so if B is natural, in other words, learning in a classroom is natural, I'll ask them this question. I'm like, okay, so if a baby was born and went right into a classroom and learned language in the classroom, learned their native language in a classroom, would they grow up to speak it? And they all say no. So I'm like, okay, wait. So if a baby can't do it in one, but it can do it in the other, they both can't be natural, right? There has to be something fundamentally different about the two. So it's like the reason why they have a hard time, the reason why they battle with this is because the only world they know of regarding English is a classroom. And so as an experiential gestalt, that's the base. That's the basic. So of course they're going to think it's natural. They don't know what unnatural is in that reality. But then they've also experienced in a completely different world, Japanese. So you have two different worlds. And it doesn't take long for them to collide, but then also doesn't take long for them to just be like, okay, yeah, the classroom is unnatural. Like, it really doesn't take long. They always initially struggle, but then they always come over and they're like, yeah. So it's like they have this innate desire to want natural, right? And it's not difficult for them to just rid their minds of what they up until that moment thought was natural. It's just crazy. For what they know is natural, right? What they thought was, which is the experiential gestalt. In this case, not all experiential gestalts are bad, like as in fake. Actually, probably most of them are, if you really think about it, you know. But in this case, it is, and so they really struggle with that. And it's a blast, kind of helping expose their minds and eyes to this, and helping them recreate the proper shape of English, so that they can learn. Because my goal as a teacher is to just get them to recreate or to reshape English in their minds so that they can learn it when they are in an environment where it can be learned in its natural state. So, for example, anywhere but a classroom, which is really true. Like, even just listening to it on TV is, the classroom doesn't help them do that, you know? So it's not just outside of Japan, even in Japan, but just anywhere outside of a classroom. They need to reshape English to be able to learn it outside of the classroom. And it's fun helping them do that. And so the first step is to show them what they should acquire. Show them the shape of the sound and the shape of the meaning that they should acquire. Basically, the shape of a word. Okay, it's you only acquire the beginning and last sounds first, and then you only attach the meaning. You attach is only the word. You dig through context to gather enough words that you understand that appear with the target word, and then you use those words to create a category into which that target word belongs. And so then you just create, you do a categorization activity to come up with just a category. And so then you would say something like, this sound is or belongs to this category. So the first step is just to find a category into which it could belong, and then from there you start discovering in what way this word is unique from other things that also belong in that category. And that is where it gets really complicated, because then you have to deal with a lot of other type of words that you don't normally deal with, in this way. Anyways, I've gotten way ahead. So the biggest thing, and I've already explained it, I'm done.